The 1910s unfortunately got a bad rep. Most are considered quite problematic by today's standards, but the thing that gets people the most is that somehow Birth of a Nation is considered the most essential one. They'll watch it, think it's complete trash, and never touch the decade again. This comes to something I've been doing for a few months now. I do have a top 10 list for every year, but for the 1910s, I only have a top 10 for the first half and then the second half of the decade. I'm going into the deep end of each year, and so far I find myself finding a surprising amount of hidden gems. This podcast episode will be me covering my top 10 for the year 1910. These films are mostly available on YouTube or any other sources of public domain. I won't risk getting copyright claimed, but I suggest finding them afterwards. But I will be showing images at the same time. With these films, something that depends too much on intertitles usually does a poor job as they completely destroy the already slower pacing. This podcast episode will hopefully show you the important lesson of how even stuff like the camera panning or how the framing is can show a lot about the narrative, even for something like documentaries. As these films are more primitive, it's easier to find these details, and it helps you to appreciate them when you see them in newer films. Anyways, enough about the chit chat, time to go through the list. My number 10 choice is a Danish film called The White Slave Trade, directed by August Blom. Danish sound films were one of the most popular internationally, especially for those who are fans of melodramas. Apparently, this is actually a shot for shot remake of a film with the same title directed by Alfred Cohn, but the film is missing except for a fragment. This is a film that aims for the more stage approach that a lot of silence went for the decade before, but I find this one to be interesting because of its content. Firstly, this is an exploitation film. There were two movements during the 1910s that have done this. One's about human trafficking, and one's about syphilis. The syphilis ones were especially successful, but most of them are lost. This was to create a fear of sex because it was rampant during this time, and with the lower class, STDs were widespread and many had to go into sex work beforehand, anyways. This one can have a pretty slow start, showing the setup of the trafficking. It was done through a newspaper ad as well, which shows how scary it was for its time, as even something with an open location like that, the police may have only been able to do so much. Whether it's real or a piece of propaganda of exploitation cinema, we won't know, but both are effective through a historical angle. The first interesting shot comes around 5 minutes and it's a triple split screen. The pimp looking for the woman on the left, the woman in charge of the brothel on the right, and in between them is the lead woman that is going to be the future victim. It's an interesting shot because it shows that they are both talking about her on the phone. Because she's the subject, she is what connects the people on each line, which is why she has to be in the middle of the three shots. As exploitation films must be extreme, this goes all out in terms of that. There are cases of attempted sexual assault and even murder. This chooses to really increase the stakes of what situation she is in. It's also quite intense because of the genre changes. The scene of a brothel party is full of hedonism, or the inevitable chase scene that is surprisingly exciting. Unfortunately, this doesn't deal with any cool framing or the visuals except for the phone call shot, but this was still well enough to make my top 10 thanks to its historical aspect of being the first wave of exploitation cinema, which is a vastly underseen side of filmmaking. My number 9 is A Day in the Life of a Coal Miner, which was directed by Charles Urban's Kineto Production Company. They are not a company that deals with artistic films, but rather more newsreel sort of footage. I love films showing labor around this time period, as they help to show the early industrialization movement to civilization. But through more modernized, we can see how they are more propaganda films. They can be very ineffective at hiding it, and this is a great example. This, of course, shows one of the worst industries of all, and I'm shocked that they tried to make it look good: the coal mining industry. The workers here are crouching practically the entire time, even when they're in the elevator. Inside the cave, it just looks like a nightmare for getting chronic back and knee pain, and the coal carts also look physically overwhelming with how fast the pacing of it all is. They try to make the viewer cheer up by showing the workers stare at the camera, but with stuff like the coal face and the overall more depressed look, it does the opposite effect. This was especially in one shot when you see someone who is clearly a child. There's then the lineup of them getting their wages, and what is quite an interesting ending. An employee returns home, and there is then coal being used for the fireplace. It's what keeps the houses warm, and they use this to justify the importance of the product. However, it kind of becomes unconvincing when you realize how the house is. It's quite big, and the inside of it is clearly someone in a higher class than a miner. If anything, it makes you wonder if it was someone in management, exploiting those workers beneath him, or if it's a pure propaganda piece trying to convince you that a miner may receive untold riches. From a filmmaking standpoint, this is quite basic. However, through the viewpoint of this being a historical propaganda piece, I found myself quite interested in this film. My number 8 is the most popular and the longest film here, The Abyss, a Danish melodrama directed by Urban God. The main aspect that makes this even more of a classic is the lead Asta Nielsen. This was her first film, and it instantly shot her to stardom. She is someone who goes for a more naturalistic acting style and has the guts to do stuff that were unheard of back then. The two major examples were being in a more non conforming gender role in Hamlet, and this film having an enticing and erotic dance sequence. In fact, this film got into trouble with various Scandinavian countries. Although it's not perfect, one of the earlier shots is what makes this interesting through its visuals, and how one can tell a character's personality through them. As she enters a streetcar, a man there is completely in love with her. After a short conversation, she gets off and the camera shifts to the left, just to make sure that she's always in his sight while he thinks about getting off to approach her. It does cut her off at the last second, but it was still impressive seeing that attempt. At the next shot, there's a sort of fence area that she's walking towards, and he stops her right before she's crossing it. It feels like he is in that desperate attempt to talk to her right before she crosses it, which implies that when she's past the fence, then it's too late. She only crosses it after when he joins her. During the first few minutes, the environments are also gorgeous. Many of the pathways are well done and have twists and turns, which gives a different sort of aesthetic, making these parks look even more interesting. There is then the sort of homewrecker, and he enters her life by literally going through a window into her room. He is now inside with her, and this is when they begin to interact. The enticing scene is when she dances with the guy who entered through the window. She ties him up and she pretty much grinds on him. This shows her agency in this situation. She may be in a love triangle, but she's the one to make the choice of which of the two men she will pick. She is in control of the situation. There is also another shot that is kind of cool to see, especially in today's standards, where everything has to be in the center of the screen to make it easier for TikTok edits. Asta's character is playing the piano on the left of the screen, and behind her is a bunch of grass with the man at the other side. It establishes a disconnect between the two. Of course, with these early melodramas, it has your over the top ending, said love triangle, which will annoy some people, and overall just is kind of fairly underwhelming. However, this got into my top 10 because of the great environments and the few shots that are earlier examples of storytelling by purely using visuals. My number 7 is a British documentary called The Birth of a Flower, directed by F. Percy Smith. This is something that you get a lot out of reading the background info on this, especially knowing that it is one of the earliest cases of time lapse photography. According to the website Screen Online, he used many devices to make sure that the time lapse photography was working without his input. This involved candle wicks, pieces of meccano, door handles, and gramophone needles. He even had a bell that would go off as an alarm if he was asleep and there was a technical malfunction. It was incredibly praised when this was released, with a journalist even saying it was the highest achievement in science. But the thing I love the most about this is how he used tinting. It gave an even more scientific look to this, like looking at an MRI or an X ray. Seeing a still original way of looking at plants was just cool to see, even if the details aren't fully there because of the monotonous color. My number 6 is SS Olympic, building and launching of an ocean palace with an unknown director. The amount of ambition that must have gone through this is ridiculous. With it being filmed in 2 years, it's a massive ship and they show every step of the way, even the blueprints. Close ups are used to show the details of what the workers are doing, but a lot of them are just great panning shots to remind you how big it is. My favorite part is the boat launch itself. The camera is stationary, and the ship is overwhelming to the point that you can't see it fully. But it shrinks more and more as it goes on until it's a background object, and at the end, the camera pans down to the crowd instead. It reminds you of how much work went into it, and how many people were involved, and what was celebrated in constructing it. As a grim bonus, its sister ship was being built at the same time, and it was a Titanic. My number 5 is The Missing Bride, a French film by Albert Capanali. First off, if I'll do more top 10s as the years go by, expect to see more of this director. He has a great sense of plot, formalism, and even style. This one almost feels like it's one of the earlier takes of gothic horror, but thanks to its overall mood, it is lighter in tone. It is also colored as well. With it being a period piece, seeing it painted in color with all the lavish costumes and environments, it's simply wonderful. It follows a wedding with a traditional kind of hide and seek game. Oddly, kind of like the film Ready or Not, only this one is innocent. Here, the bride finds a place to hide but realizes she can't get out, and finds a skeleton, and panic ensues. The gates and doors are never in the center of the screen, yet the people go into focus after walking in and out of them, making them the central focus. It can be a more interesting trick of how to make sure the audience shifts their focus towards the characters, and more can be exposed as they have to walk towards a different direction than just towards the camera. The way he shoots the ruins of the location is astounding even to this day. A bunch of rocks can be at the center, yet a broken down pole won't be cut off on the left side. On top of this, the people are still in focus in the proper locations. The set of the room where she gets trapped in does give an effective spooky feel. I especially love the touch of this massive book being held up by a rock. As the book gets opened, she simply stares at it, and this plot device is used by showing the film footage inside one of the pages while she stares at it. Not only that, but it also moves between pages. They could have simply used intertitles to explain what was in the book, but Albert went for the more stylistic touch, and it makes this segment a lot more compelling. As for the ending twist, let's just say a cat is involved. I'm sure that'll get enough people to see this. My number 4 is A Marriage in the Moon, an Italian film by Enrico Novelli. This one can be seen as outdated because it is a throwback to Malaise films. However, it stands out by being based on both sets and animated sequences. It's a fresh take on an old formula. It's a sci fi romance, and thanks to its animated sequences, it reminded me of the 1920s sci fi film Our Heavenly Bodies. The opening shot has a great focus to it where it doesn't show the entire observatory, but they make sure to show the tower behind the balcony. It does provide a nice balance. During the pans towards the planets, which are unfortunately still life, but still fabulous, you begin to see the sci fi costume design, which is a mix of steampunk and the type of costumes you would see in cheap 1950s sci fi films. The scenes do pick up as they go on. The space teleprompter shows a nicely edited animation sequence, and the true set designs begin when they set up the ship for the protagonist and for the love interest to go to the moon. There is a mixture of what seems to be borderline painted on with the sets, but there's something very mechanical about everything else. The spinning cogwheel or the chain moving the gate. The woman in the film has the contrast of her going down a sort of roller coaster ramp, as opposed to the man's steampunk approach. It shows how their difference are still bringing them together to a middle point. Plus, seeing that variety is great. It does go a bit downhill in the final few scenes as they are doing the underwhelming stage tableau sort of thing, but the way the backgrounds are constructed did help bring more focus into the overall picture of it. It gives more for the viewer to focus on. This is the entry in the list that is simply cute and fun. My number 3 is Santa Lucia, an Italian documentary directed by Piero Morelli. This is another type of early film that I love, travelogue documentaries. They are time capsules where you can see cities in a new light and their more recent developments, especially when you compare directly with stuff like landmarks that are still there today. The thing that makes this stand out is just how fantastic the shots are, and how this is quite experimental for its day. At the opening shot, I knew this was going to be special. It shows the Santa Lucia flag, but it's slightly transparent and you could see the city behind it. This does fall under the more Lumiere Brothers style of films that are called actualities, but thanks to the drastic and constant change of camera styles, it does keep things fresh. This involves many stuff like static shots where you see so many boats that you don't know how they're going to move past it, panning shots to keep the boat in the shot, or the camera on the boat to quickly move throughout the city itself. They even do a more simulation sort of shot where it looks like it's through a telescope. This does keep things fresh for a film that already piqued my interest. My favorite shot is seeing three different shots at once, but it's not your basic case of just having three of them being symmetrical in size. One is a square, one is a rectangle, and finally on the left side is a very small rectangle. They show different aspects of the city as well, and it's probably the most experimental shot I've seen from a film from that year. This is especially during a brilliant edit where there's people walking through the middle triangle and then disappearing, not entering the left or the right one. It makes a very cool case of a disconnect. Another shot knows how to use something called deep focus. In the front is a sort of pole with a bunch of standing sticks, the middle has the people rowing from left to right, and the back has more parts of the city with what looks like a lighthouse. There is a lot to take in this shot, and it's simply brilliant. If you want a trip to the past, seeing stuff like the simple rowing shots can be enough, and I honestly would have still liked it. But the fact that this film is so gorgeous makes it one of the highlights and one of my favorites of this year. My number two is The Oval Portrait, a French film directed by Léonce Perret. This is another one of the longer films here at 20 minutes, but this one is ahead of its time in terms of its narrative. It's a very early case of a psychological drama, and one where you could have more in depth interpretations of it. It gets constantly compared to Vertigo, and for good reason. A man is obsessed with his attractive wife and paints a portrait of her in a hunting outfit. Then they go hunting and he accidentally shoots her in the dumbest way possible. He then is filled with grief and has that constant urge to finish that painting. Of course, the vertical part has to come in, and he meets someone that looks exactly the same, which causes her to be rightfully creeped out at first when she finds out. It seems to go for this creepy ending by it being sort of happy, but it makes one wonder what all this means. It could be seen as a take on grief, but could it also be a case of a sort of trophy wife? He wants his type and not caring about who the person actually is, just as long as it's a person that looks very similar. You can go into this with similar approaches. This film also contains one of the better cases of framing, making sure you notice the architecture of the house, the leaves on the poles, and the nearby trees that are missing their leaves. There was a very impressive panning shot of the carriage going through the gate to the house and then going into the far distance of the road, with a dog following them, and the camera pans to make sure that they remain in that shot. After he shot her, he yelled for help by staying at the top of the staircase in the middle of the thirds on the right side, while the servant was in the middle of the thirds on the left side, and then there was a grass on the poles being in between. It's an aesthetically pleasing shot that would even work extremely well today, both aesthetically and through its use of narrative, and makes for a wonderful combination. And finally, my number one is The Clay Industry in Sicily, an Italian documentary directed by Piero Morelli. This is a similar case of the coal mining film, but although the industry seems more into the traditional method, and the products are more on the beautiful side at the end, it's quite effective propaganda. It can make you ignore the heavy part and think that it's hard work that pays off to make such beautiful products, and I can totally understand why one would think that. But for the people that look at the mining part and how it gets ignored, it teaches an important lesson in that regard as well. It opens with some great establishing shots before the labor part comes in, which is an interesting approach in showing what a beautiful place they tend to live in. As they carry the clay on the carts, it honestly kind of feels like a film noir. The lighting, even though it's made naturally, is fantastic. They are just shadows, yet you could see the lights behind them, and the tinting makes this even more noticeable. The automatic carts look great through a historical perspective, but as they leave the cave and go into the outdoors, it feels like they are now entering the light, meaning that they are entering the next step as it immediately cuts to them removing the raw clay rock from the cart. It then shows even more exploitation of both styles. A child is actually working, and he smacks the butt of a donkey for it to go in a circular motion. The second half then goes into the artistic output of this. There are people making vases, using the same techniques we see today. You think someone working in that job would be more fulfilling, but on another shot it zooms out and you realize, wait a minute, all of these vases are literally exactly the same. His labor is just as repetitive as the rest of the staff. This even shows it well in the final step. People do decorative plates by painting on them or more patterned vases. No matter the segment of the industry, the more you realize how repetitive and borderline exploitative they can be. The fact that this could so easily convince people but also intrigue them when they look past the surface and get something different out of it, as well as the film's overall beauty, makes this for a fantastic film and my favorite of 1910. And that is it for my top 10 of the year. I hope this inspired you to watch these or at least see the YouTube shorts to get a glimpse of how they look. I am in 1914 now and I may continue this. If you think this is a good idea, or if you have more ideas, be sure to comment. I am thinking of doing a primer of first year film studies showing an infamous scene and how well it actually works to a narrative perspective. Would any of you be interested in that? Either way, be sure to subscribe and I'll post my next episode in 2 weeks. See you then.